Hello and welcome to another special episode of Mindspeak presented by Herald Global. I am Samik Sen, and joining us today, founder, Vice Chancellor of National Law University, Delhi, and he was also the former member of the Legal Education Committee of the Bar Council of India, Dr. Ranveer Singh, to discuss law in the time of COVID. Dr. Ranveer Singh, thank you so much for taking out this time for us. So my question to you, how has the legal education evolved in the past decade?
I think I should take you slightly back, not really 10 years. The landscape of the legal education started changing when the first law school of law was established in 1988 at Bangalore, known as National Law School of India, University Bangalore, and that started functioning in 1988. So that was the year when actually the major reforms in legal education were envisaged. And for 10 long years, there was no other law school. And it was only in 1998, that the law school was established at Hyderabad, known as Nelsar University of Law, Hyderabad. Fortunately, the responsibility was given to me, right? So for a long time, after the law school Bangalore was established, the second law school was not there because of the fact that the Bar Council, because the school was established by the Bar Council and the Ministry of Law, they wanted to see the product of the law school, and they said once the experiment is successful, then we may think of the other law schools. So to cut the story short, 96, there was a meeting of the law ministers, and then there a kind of assessment was done, and they found that the experiment has been a huge success. The students of the law schools have done really well, and they are going to best of places abroad. They are joining best of places, and it was decided there that let us have a law school in each and every state. So it is in that sequence that now we have roughly 25 law schools now, including the state law universities. This is how it started.
Okay.
Yeah.
So tell us about your role in the 19th Law Commission of India.
My role in the 19th Commission of India was, I was at Hyderabad that time, and I was a part-time member. And the 19th Commission took up some reforms, like if you look at the report, there are a lot of areas, but mainly the areas are in relation to they were looking at the corporate fee when they file litigation as to the litigation fee which is charged from various litigants, whether there should be a separate slab or it should be same slab. There was also a very important topic for research with the commission was actually the criminal liability of the well-to-do people, like those who are in places of power, and then also the matrimonial alliances and then the customary practices, you can call it honor killing, and also euthanasia 49(8)(a). These were some broad areas which the 19th Law Commission was looking into, and for which the report was given to the government. It was the chairperson of the commission was Justice Venkata Ram Reddy, a former judge of the Supreme Court of India. Very bright, very hardworking, sincere, and a very, very good judge. So that's how yeah.
So how did you make NLU the second best law institution in India? How did you do it?
The story goes like this. When I was at Hyderabad 2008, Honorable Justice Bhandari happened to visit me. He was that time the Honorable Judge of the Supreme Court of India. I never knew the purpose of the visit. Honorable Justice Singhvi was the Chief Justice, and he expressed a desire to come to the law school, also meet me. And after he went around the campus, by the time the campus was there, and it is a beautiful campus if you have ever seen Nalsar, University of Law, Hyderabad. And then he said, your mandate at Hyderabad is over. Why don't you come to Delhi? We are establishing a law school. So I never knew what was the role of the Honorable Justice Bhandari. But then I said that Delhi, for me, I don't think I stand a chance in Delhi, because there's JNU, there is Jamia Millia, there is other universities. There are at least 2-3 central universities, and other universities where very senior professors are there. So I don't think, I'm also not thinking of NLU Delhi. He said, no, if you are interested, you let me know. I said, it's not a question of my being interested, but I'm very happy here because I had started my 4th term at NLSAR Hyderabad. Then he opened up and said, no, I'm the chairperson of the committee, and I'm very keen that if you agree, and I have the mandate of the other members, that if you agree, we will ask you to come to Delhi. And can we have a meeting or a dinner with the Chief Justice and Chief Minister and other people, those who matter for the law school? I said, okay. So that's how it happened. Then I came and they said, you join as fast as possible. And here I was in 2008, July rather. To be exact, it was 21st of July that I joined NLU Delhi. My mandate was very clear when I came here, which I discussed with the honorable members of the Governing Council. Mr. Jaitley was there, Abhishek Singhvi was there, Justice Geeta Mittal was there, Justice Wadhwa was there, Justice Sikri was there, all, and Justice Mukaddam Sharma, who was the Chief Justice, and along with the Justice Bhandari, of course. So I said my mandate is very clear because I have seen the working of the law schools. By now, they were 13 law schools. I said they're not doing much in research. And if we lag somewhere behind the other law schools, the best of law schools outside India, we see that the schools abroad, they put a lot of emphasis on the research, and we have not done it. So my mandate would be to do a lot of research, to create a kind of a culture where a lot of research is there. Another thing was that I had a 3-pronged strategy. In the sense, I believe that the kind of professionals, those who will come out of the law schools, they would be technically sound, professionally competent, and socially relevant. The first one, I mean, the very strong interface between IT and law, and they should be professionally competent, means the art of advocacy, like activities like moots and other activities. And then they should also engage into legal aid work, so that we don't only have robots and good advocates, but they also associate themselves with the community, with the society, and play some societal role. And I'm happy that I could do that.
What are the challenges law students have faced in this pandemic? What do you think?
It disrupted the entire process. India was a country which was not too much into online education, neither research. And for us, we were in fact caught unaware. We for some time never knew what to do. And we have been talking about artificial intelligence. We have been talking about disruptive technologies. We have been talking about the time is going to come where systems will be disrupted. We have to think of something else. If you read the books of Richard Susskind and of Lawyer and the other books, these emphasis on artificial intelligence and the online dispute resolution. So we were really not prepared. And we are a country where we have a huge digital divide, you all know. We have a whole knowledge divide we have, and we also have a demographic divide. So with these very, very challenging concerns which everybody has to grapple with, so we had to find ways and means that how online education can be relevant for students. So to be short, the institutions which had those facilities, like the law schools or the good law faculties or good colleges, for them it was not a difficulty. But the colleges which were, because India, legal education is not in the island of excellence, the law schools and some selected law faculties, there are about 1,600 other institutions. So whether they have those kind of skills or manpower, or the teachers are sufficient, equipped with to deal with those kind of things. So I will frankly admit, students faced a huge challenge, and they are still struggling. But fortunately now there are certain modes like blended mode of learning, and then there are certain online courses available. Like NLU Delhi, we create about 600 lectures which are online available on SWAYAM portal of the UGC and the HRD. We also created some MOOC courses. We were doing it out of fun at that time. And we then suddenly realized, my God, it is so useful for each and every institution. And it is free for any student. Any student can log in anywhere in any remotest corner of the country and can make use of those lectures delivered by in an audio-visual mode by best of teachers. So I definitely would be of the concern that it has been a very, very tough time for these students.
Okay. So, Dr. Singh, I would like to take, the direction towards Supreme Court in the recent time. So do you think an institute like a Supreme Court failed to discharge its constitutional duties during the pandemic? Or do you think so?
If it was a tough time for me and you, and also for the other institutions, it was equally tough for the Supreme Court. And when I say it was typically equally tough for the Supreme Court, because maybe the Supreme Court, certain judges were tuned to the online kind of dispute resolution. But see at the profile of your lawyers in the Supreme Court or the high courts, or even I'm not talking about the lower courts at all, but they were not at all prepared to go for a kind of online litigation. So it was equally tough for the Supreme Court how to deal with the disruptive technologies and online dispute resolution system, because it needed a whole range of skill training actually, and we had no idea that it is going to happen, and there was no skills imparted either to the judges or to the lawyers that how to effectively argue online litigation kind of thing. So it was difficult even for the Supreme Court.
Okay. So, we know that Supreme Court has the power of PIL, like public interest litigations and suo motu. But recently, just maybe 1 week's time, we have been seeing a lot of those powers being exercised, which we didn't prior to that. So any particular reason why it has been like this?
Maybe the one reason is that the floodgates of PIL cases, Supreme, of course, we have to be very, very considerate to the pending areas with the Supreme Court, that how many PIL cases have. Now, each and everybody is using all kinds of litigation as a PIL litigation. And many of the litigation is also populist, which really serves no purpose at all, except wasting the time of the court. So the purpose of the PIL litigation was that where you do not have locus standi, but still feel concerned with the common person and the community, and you don't have any recourse, and then certainly the gates are open for you to go to the Supreme Court. It has done wonderful work. You see the Vishakha judgment, you see judgments in case of the prison reforms, criminal justice reforms, criminal justice administration. But then there is an environmental law, for example, the whole range of assembly lineage of cases decided by the Supreme Court, where PIL has contributed to the jurisprudence of the country in a very, very significant way. But at the same time, PIL also put a lot of burden on the Supreme Court, where sometimes they do not know which cases to take up and which cases not to take up. In the process, I certainly agree with you that some not very good cases were taken up, and some good cases could not be taken up. And I agree that PIL, the kind of importance it was given initially, and it did a wonderful job, of course, was watered down by the litigation which started pouring in. That may be the reason, probably. And then there were other pressing litigation issues as well.
Okay. Yeah. So what would you like to say about the farm laws? What is your take on it?
Actually, my reaction is, first is that the state farm laws are state. It is a state list. If you look at the state entry and entry 14, agriculture comes in the state list. So my take would be that the whatever form laws or reforms should have come, it should have come the other way around. They should have come through the states, not from the center. And then we have a very strong mechanism, and even if they think that there is some national policy involved, and they can do it at the center level, then there is a procedure. The procedure is that you have to have a standing committee, and then the bill will go to the standing committee, and then you obtain the views of the standing committee. It is put on the website. You obtain the views of the common man of the country, and also the people, those who are affected, maybe the farm unions or maybe the Agriculture Price Commission. All those are connected with agriculture, their views are taken, and then it is discussed in the Interstate Council, which is a very, very powerful body in the federal system of the country, and especially in India. So Interstate Council meetings have been very frequently happening to discuss issues where the involvement of the center and the state is there. In these particular laws, I don't know what was the hurry, but the procedures were not really followed, and to that extent, probably maybe the Supreme Court should look into that. There were very, very serious procedural flaws, violative of the practices which were democratic, constitutional, procedural. So whether the laws should really stand, to my view, the laws are unconstitutional.
Okay.
This is my personal view, of course.
No, I completely,
Yes.
of course, yes.
Yeah.
So what would you like to say about the PIS seeking direction to restrain news channels from reporting negative news?
I think the country has to be sensitive. The pandemic situation is a very, very dangerous situation. Long back, I read an article when there was a plague in Surat. Somebody wrote a beautiful article, and I will not deal in detail, but I'll significantly underscore 2 points. The writer said that we are a country at best in panic situations. When there is panic, nothing like India. We all come, we all join hands, we help the state governments, we help the central government, and we are the best of people. And second observation which the writer made was, we are a nation of lost priorities. And unfortunately, in this pandemic situation which we are facing today, we were not best in scare, the scare we call it, and the best of when the situation is so scaring. We are certainly not best. The states, the government, the machinery, the police, the health workers, the hospitals, everybody is struggling, and nobody knows what to do. And there is shortage of almost everything, man-made and the otherwise also. And unfortunate thing is that, as I said in the beginning, that we are best in panic situations. We are also proving to be worst in panic situations. Some people are trying to hoard things. They are selling the medicines at a price. The prices have been increased, or shortage have been created, and all kinds of things are happening, which is very, very painful. Instead of fighting together the pandemic, if you resort to practices like this is certainly a cause of concern and failure of the system at all levels. I'm not putting blame either on executive or legislative or judiciary. When the three wings are given the responsibility to govern the university, govern the country, somewhere, all three wings have somewhere failed to deliver the goods. So we are not best in panic situation. We are the worst in panic situation.
Do you think the center must impose a lockdown as the Supreme Court just recommended it?
No, but why? Supreme Court is a very independent, autonomous institution. Neither Supreme Court should put any restrictions on the government, neither the government should put any restrictions on the Supreme Court. We have been functioning for what, more than 70 years, and we know what are our Lakshman Rekha of the Supreme Court and the government. Everybody knows to what extent we can go and we should not go. And if we cross that, it will certainly disturb the democratic system. It will also somewhere spoil the systems. And if the systems will crumble, then the democracy can't sustain. So everybody has to be careful to exercise their powers within the framework given by the constitution. We can't go by say bye-bye to the constitution and function. That is our what we call it, Bible or alma mater or whatever basic document which governs us. I think we should be very particular about the document which was given to the founding fathers, that this is how the country would be run. We should not forget what Ambedkar said. Whatever good the constitution may be, if the people governing the country are not good, it will be no good constitution. And whatever bad a constitution may be, if the people governing the country are good, deliver a wonderful job. So it will ultimately depend how people would take care of the constitution and whether they take it seriously or they take it. Everything is there in the constitution. I think that should be taken seriously.
Okay. My last question to you, what would you like to tell the people in the current situation?
I think we should not get panicky, and everybody has to be sensitive to what is happening in the country. Let me give you one example. When the constitution was being framed, our Indian constitution, and do you know that it was done in two years and 13 days and something, and some 260 or some days. I happened to visit to Nepal. They were struggling with their sixth draft of the constitution. They asked me how India. Then I told them that Indian leaders at that time were so great that none of the leaders put their own self-interest before the constitution. For everybody, constitution was supreme, country was supreme, and every interest was put into the background, and that's how they could come out with a wonderful document in such a short time. We say the leaders are the fog, those who think of the country first and anything else later on, party or no party. India comes first, everything else comes later on. My message is very clear and simple. If India stands, if India survives, we all survive. If India doesn't survive, nobody survives.
Nobody survives. Thank you so much for taking out this time for us, Mr. Singh.
Yeah. It was wonderful, and catch up with you some other time on some other issues. Thank you very much.
Definitely.